What inspired you to write it?
Well, Confessions of a Helmet-Free Childhood is really a reflection and a celebration of a certain slice of time. I was born in 1960, and believe it or not, 1970 was 50 years ago when I was 10. And I thought there would be a whole cluster of books about this, but then COVID happened, and I think our focus shifted. But I wanted to just take a minute and write out some stories about crazy things that I did as a kid that I would argue are pretty universal and reflective of growing up in that time. And if you think about the television shows, you know, Leave It to Beaver, Dennis the Menace, Flipper, Lassie, it all had to do with the adventures of boys. And, you know, we weren't just playing jacks and jumping rope in the background. There were things going on. And not that this is it doesn't have a feminist slant. It was really, I think these stories are universal, boys or girls. But I just wanted to capture a moment in time. And I have 2 children who are 20 and almost 23. And I'm struck by the difference of their childhood versus mine. And I think a helmet-free childhood is basically, we didn't have to wear helmets. We didn't have safety belts. We could jump in the payload of a truck. And that was not, you know, crimes against humanity. I just wanted to capture it.
I know. I miss going for bike rides without needing a helmet. I grew up without a helmet. I grew up not wearing a seatbelt half the time. I grew up in the back of a pickup truck.
Right. I think it's both a good and bad thing. And like both my kids were skateboarders. When I was coming up in the 70s, the kids I remember skateboarding were wearing tube socks and a smile. I mean, you know, there was no equipment. And I don't think that was an entirely good thing. But I think that what I wanted to celebrate was that moment in time where parents said, hey, go out and play and come back, you know, at dinner, or come back when the sun goes down, or come back when the street lights go on. And they pretty much didn't know where we were. I mean, we had a scope of where we were allowed to be. You couldn't go miles away, but you got on your bike or you walked down the street and knocked on the door till you found a friend and off you went.
Right. I mean, I grew up, here's my bicycle, bought at a thrift store, flea market, or wherever Grandpa got it from, right? Because that was Grandpa. But those were the bikes I liked, and they're broken in. I didn't have to break anything in. Okay, you have 30 minutes or an hour. Go.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll see you when I see you.
Yeah. Okay, Grandpa, I'm checking in, or my check-in was right past the house. That was it.
Right, or you can go as far as Maple Street and as far as the school, you know, and you're like, okay, you knew what your scope was. And then literally I can remember playing on, you know, watching an ant colony or building a dam in a creek, and then you'd hear your Cinnia, Valerie, Sheila, and you're like, oh, we better get home. Tina, there's more of us.
Yeah, it is a completely different childhood from even what my daughter has. Right. I would never send her on a bicycle down the street.
Right.
I would never I
would never go to a neighbor. I wouldn't send my kids to the neighbor's house without calling them first, saying, hey, I'm sending Scott or Natalie over for an egg or a cup of sugar. And I can remember like getting home from school, putting my stuff down and going, I'm going out to play. And I'd literally just go down the street. Hi, is Davy home? Hi, is, you know, Vanessa home? Can she come out and play? And there's no way I would let my kid like just go down the street.
It's a completely different mentality than what we had growing up. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s versus now, and it's a completely different shift.
But I think it's still, I think some of it is still in place depending on where you live. I grew up in the suburban Midwest, so it was just a little more low key. My children grew up in Los Angeles, a big city, so it was different. But I think what I wanted to do was celebrate the things that are universal about kids. And I argue that childhood is education in real time. You're like, what happens when I strike this match? You know, what if, can I put an egg in the toaster? What happens if you throw a brick into the lake? I mean, that's how you find out. And so my confessions are basically 13 essays on things like, I destroyed my friend's doll. I scraped up my sister's bike. I threw water balloons off a hotel lobby. And you know, my neighbor, when she read it, she goes, wow, you were kind of a brat. And I said, no, I wasn't. I wasn't an angel. But I think, you know, you're a kid and you think, let's see what happens when I do this. Well, sometimes there's good consequences and sometimes there's very bad consequences, but you learn from that.
Yes, you do. I remember taking my sister's, we did this every year back and forth, would wrap a present, Christmas or birthday. wrap it up with tape, and then have different layers of different.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it was just one of our things, and each year we tried to outdo the year before or the event before.
Yeah, I've seen that as a party game, and I think that's great fun. And I think, you know, the other thing that you learn, you know, I had I'm one of four. I have three sisters. I have number two of four. And you learn group dynamics under that situation. I mean, yeah, sometimes we paired up the little sisters and the big sisters because of interest, or that we just, you know, the older ones had a little more flexibility than the younger ones. But at the same time, sometimes it was 3 against 1. Sometimes it was every woman for herself. But you learn how to get along. And you also learn how to navigate your parents with your siblings. You know, sometimes you take one for the team, you know,
yes,
and sometimes they take one for you. And so I think that's a fun thing to explore. But I mean, again, I don't want to get too cerebral about it, because the spirit of the book was a humorous memoir. And what I'm encouraged is that my neighbor is 97 years old. She's laughing. She loves it. I have cousins who have children who are 7 and 8. They're reading it at bedtime, and they laugh because they're just the silly things kids do.
Yeah, we do so many silly things as kids, and then we put it into paper and go, gee, was I a brat, or is this just funny?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I think the thing is you're making decisions in real time, but you don't have any working knowledge of anything. So, you know, it seems like a good idea. Like, there's the story of us throwing water balloons off the balcony, you know, and that's a relatively harmless event, unless somebody who's works at the hotel happens to walk at the very wrong moment, gets hit with a lot of water balloons and the grime from the driveway, and now they have to go into work and they're a mess. And that was not our intention, but that happened. And, you know, same thing, I totally messed up. My sister had a beautiful Schwinn Stingray bike, and I usually had to ask permission to use her bike. But I thought, oh, this will just take an instant. I'm going to go up the street, and I'm going to go as fast as I can down the hill, and then like take that turn. Well, in a perfect world, that would have been just fine. I would have done it. I would have made the turn and then brought the bike back. No worse for wear. Unfortunately, I hit sand at the bottom of the hill, went flying, and I got really kind of scraped up, but the chain guard of her Stingray bike got a deep gash in it. So I don't know, really. I mean, I remember how much it hurt, but I was also the old thing of when you think as a little kid, oh, I'm going to be in big trouble. And I had to walk all scraped and gravelly back home with the Stingray that is now got a really horrible scrape on it that it didn't have 10 minutes ago, and face with my parents. So again, I don't think it was let's mess up my sister's bike. It was, hey, I'm just going to take a quick joyride, and no one's going to be worse. You know, nothing's going to be worse for the wear. And it went very wrong.
Yeah, my grandfather said you're not allowed at Turtle Pond. Turtle Pond is this little swampy area in the woods by the railroad tracks behind a friend's house.
Yeah.
He's like, you're not allowed there.
What could go wrong?
Yeah. You know, you have to go there when your parents say you cannot go there. Right. So you trespass across the railroad tracks, because railroad tracks you're not supposed to cross anyway.
Right. That's a potentially death.
Yeah, don't do that. I mean, the railroad tracks that I had back in the 90s, they had maybe one train a day, so it wasn't a.
Even so, bad timing could be.
Bad timing, bad things can happen. There's electrified metal. Let's think about that. Electric metal, not a good thing. So we cross the pond with one of my friends, and we go, or the railroad tracks go to the pond, and there's this hill. Now, to me, the hill was a mountain. Okay, sure. It's not that big. It's about 2 stories up. But we're going to ride our bikes down it. Perfect world. Everything will work out great, because you see all the boys doing it. Nothing happens to them. Here's me. Go down half the hill, wind up covered in mud. The bike is caked in mud. Have to get the bike out of the pond. Yeah. Well,
no, and it was, to your point, when I talk to people who've read the book, they'll say, oh my gosh, I screwed up my sister's bike, or I, you know, had a water balloon incident, or I played with matches and nearly set the couch on fire. And so you learn about the natural world, you learn about human relationships, you learn about what your place is in the world. There's a story in the book about a boy who was very mean to one of my sister's friends. And I just lost it and got into his face about it. And we weren't going to fight on the bus, but we squared off the bus. And I realized, he's like 1 or 2 years older than me and physically bigger. And I said, well, I'll come to your house and we'll do this. And my sister's like, that's strange. Went home, changed clothes for the fight because, wasn't going to wear my school clothes to a fight. And by the time I came to his house, he was already watching TV and clearly had totally forgotten about it. But it was a go. I said I was going to do this. And, I remember him stepping out into the yard and thinking, okay, well, at least it's going to happen on the yard and not on his cement patio. That was an uptick. And what he did was basically get into my face and swear at me and then stomp off. And I remember just absorbing that moment going, well, that wasn't fun, but it was much better than I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to get punched or thrown to the ground. But I think he being one of, 4 or 5 boys and me being one of 4 girls, he kind of knew like hitting a girl on the front yard was not going to be a good look to his parents. But he wasn't going to let it go. So he, was nasty to me and stomped off. And I thought, well, like, cool, this is great. But when people have asked me about that story, I'm like, I don't think I would have done that if it wasn't a boy I knew. This was a boy who lived 3 doors down. He could be a pain in the neck, but like I didn't know how far it was going to go that day, but I didn't have a feeling like, I was going to be bloodied on the sidewalk. But I wouldn't have done that with a boy I didn't know. And so I think this is sort of the social landscape that you go through. I just couldn't stand the way he was teasing this girl. She'd done nothing but just sat on the bus, and he just was bored and, okay, I'm going to go after Liz today. So you figure that out. The other thing is navigating teachers. I've told my kids, your teachers are sort of a dress rehearsal for the bosses of your life. There are some teachers that you're going to get along great with, and you understand what they want, and you have mastery of the subject, and that class is fun for you. And then there's this other class that, to your way of thinking, the teacher's too strict or was in a bad mood or is very inconsistent with directions. So says, I need a paper on this. You hand it in. They're like, no, you were supposed to do that. And you're like, but the boss is the boss and you have to deal with it. You learn how to navigate that. And it's also learning how to deal with your friends. Sometimes your friends are mean to you and you have to navigate. And sometimes, I don't think I was a mean person, but I think I could be thoughtless in the purest sense that I didn't think. And there's a story in the book about me destroying my friend's doll. Now, that wasn't intentional. Hey, let's mess up the doll. I don't know if you remember Chrissy dolls, but they were a doll that the hair extended from a hole in the back of her head, and you could wind up her tummy, and it would go back.
I had a Ariel doll that did that.
Yeah, very similar idea. Yeah. I would say, and to say how important this doll was in the 70s would be equated to like American Girl dolls. It was a big deal. If you got this doll, it was great. And I wasn't super into dolls, but my friend Carol at the time got this doll, and I thought it was really great. And so the fun about the doll was, she could have hair to here, she could have it down to the middle of her back, and we're going back and forth, and the doll's hair got stuck. And so we're like, okay, what are we gonna do about this? So I decided after a couple of tries, let's just cut her hair because she has an endless supply. She's not like other dolls. That was idiotic, but I was in 5th grade. So we snipped her hair, and then we wanted it longer later, and we could extend it only so far. And my girlfriend burst into tears because she realized we had ruined the cool thing about this doll. And of course the mother came down and she says, why'd you cut her hair? And I'm like, well, because it's a Chrissy doll, we thought. And she's like, no, that's not how that works. But I can still remember how horrible I felt because my girlfriend was crying about it. This was a very favorite toy of hers, and it was my stupid idea that ruined it. And you feel badly, and that can be a damaging moment with a little kid friendship. It can be a damaging moment with, you borrow your friend's, fill in household item, and it breaks on your watch. Well, you have to replace it. Yeah. So these are the things that kids learn. But again, I don't want to get too interior about it. It's really more the fun nuttiness of it. And
it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to give us life lessons. It's supposed to be, don't think while you're reading it, it's just read it.
Well, also, I think considering what we're dealing with right now, it's a nice break, and it's just like it's supposed to be. I said to one of my friends, it's the literary equivalent of a stick of gum. It's just a fun little read. If you sat down, opened the page, and said, "I'm going to finish it," you'll probably be done in about an hour. It's a really quick read, but similar to the books like Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, and Maria Shriver's book, 10 Things I Wish I Knew Before I Went Out on My Own, or One More Thing Before You Go. It's sort of that. And in writing, this is my first book, and in writing it, I really didn't feel I had the structural chops to write a novel with different characters and plot lines and things. But the structure of this book is basically a series of essays that move along in a semi-chronological fashion. But again, what I wanted to do was pick these things that I did that I think were evocative of a time. And one of the things that my sister read in the book that she didn't even know I did was that I snuck into a museum exhibit. My sixth grade boyfriend at the time, we were dropped off at a museum. I know, well, romance in sixth grade. But so we went, and we were just checking things out and having a good time. And but one, sixth graders allowed alone in a museum, that wouldn't happen. But we came upon one of those, like a English dining room. It was really pretty, and all they had was a cord. There was no electronic sensor or a camera. And so we snuck into it. He sat at one end of the table and I sat at the other. We sort of pretend to be a lord and lady or king and queen for a couple of minutes, and then we tucked out. But I mean, we had enough sense that we knew this was all special old stuff, and that we weren't going to touch it or move it around or anything. We just wanted to see if we could do it. And we were only there for about 3 minutes, ducked out. But I mean, I feel so lucky that I got to do that, and kids today could never do that because of all the protective measures.
We had a sixth grade field trip to a mansion. Parts of it were brought over from Poland, parts of it from different parts of the world. There were rooms that were hundreds of years old back in the 90s.
Okay.
Those rooms were decorated with all this really old stuff. Okay.
That's cool.
But it's so beautiful. But there was no ropes. There was no cameras. There was no nothing. We're just told, don't touch it. And we're expected as sixth graders, don't touch it.
Yeah.
You cannot now, in our technology-ridden communities, do this because our kids have no concept of do not touch.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. In that's already self-guarded. I mean, I certainly saw with my kids, they didn't have the street sense I had, and I'm not talking about what I'm talking about is knowing to cross the street, knowing to look both ways, knowing to be just cognizant of what's going on. My son crossed a 2-lane street in a beach community like it was our driveway. And, I pulled him aside and said, you didn't look either way. You just walked across. Oh, well, it's cool. Well, it worked out this time, but, try that in other parts and, you could get yourself run over. So I think the other thing, when I was thinking about this book vis-a-vis, COVID and kids are hemmed in, the thing that I love about kids is they find joy regardless of current events. I remember when the Haitian earthquake happened, or hurricane, and they were just, Port-au-Prince was wiped out, and I'll always remember they were doing a newscast about it and assessing the damage and and in the corner of the shot you saw 2 little boys playing with a paper kite. They were flying a kite and laughing and having a grand time like it was just another day in the neighborhood. And I think that's the amazing thing about kids. I mean, if you watch any movies about World War II, kids who grew up in the Blitz of London, and yet they found ways to have fun and dance and have toys and have adventures. And I think there's a lesson for all of us in that yes, you have to be clear-eyed about your surroundings and your situation, but there's joy to be found in every day.
Right. My daughter, with this COVID thing, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do this. Okay, what can we do? Oh, we can dress up with mommy, do mommy's hair and makeup and everything, and make her look like something else. I'm like, oh, so I'm a human doll.
Yes, of course. Well, you're an oversized toy, and nothing's more glamorous than playing with a grown lady's hair. I remember doing that with my aunt and thinking it was fabulous. And I think it's great that everybody's kind of revisited the kitchen. When my kids were little, making blueberry muffins was an extreme joy because they don't take very long to make, and they're delicious. And you made them, and you feel very accomplished. Now, it's a bit of a tussle getting everybody to do the cleanup, but it's great fun making them and baking them and eating them.
Right. So we have this one book out. Are you planning to write another?
Yes, I'd like to. And what's really funny is I've had high school friends going like, how far are you going to go with this. And I was very respectful both of my parents and my sister's privacy as well as my childhood friends' privacy. I didn't use any last names. And I think there's plenty more to say. I guess, this book came out in January and COVID sort of blossomed in March. And so I haven't had as much opportunity to promote it as I'd like. I think those opportunities will happen. But I think this process will direct what I want to do. I could do more about this chapter in life. Mm-hmm. I think there's rich stuff in, high school and a young adult and navigating things. But I think what I might do is pivots on this time. I mean, I was thinking about what we considered were modern luxuries at the time. I can remember when my neighbor got a garage door opener. I thought that was fantastic. I mean, I tell that to my kids. I think it's laughable, but that was amazing. The television remote, okay? We were the kids who had to get up and turn the channel. That was fantastic. Electric can opener, forget about it. That was so much better than a hand one. And then the one that changed my life was the handheld blow dryer. I remember this little Panasonic that my mother got that my sister and I are like, are you kidding me? You don't have to sit under that, bonnet hair dryer and not be able to move around, and you can get this done in 7 minutes instead of having to wait 20 minutes for your curlers and everything to dry. That was incredible. So I think there's something there, or take one of these stories and build it. I just, as a first time author, I felt that I should keep it simple, keep it concise, and keep it true to form. That each of the essays is about 2 or 3 pages long. It definitely has a beginning, middle, and end, and there's a lesson in it. And I try to inject an element of humor in each of them. And I'm kind of enraptured with the idea of these little gemmy books. There is a tsunami of novels out there and mysteries and plenty of nonfiction to read right about now. So I mean, I think I see the trajectory of things like Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. These very sweet little books that, although they're simple in material, they're universal in appeal.
Those are some of the most wonderful books because you learn a lot of information, have fun with it, but they're not meant to be 8-hour reads.
Exactly. And believe me, I have nothing but regard for people who can map that all out. My pleasure reading definitely fell off while I was raising children, but I was in a book club with other adults and, was introduced to books that I would have never read otherwise. And I think as a writer, I've seen previous interviews that you've had with watching other people's podcasts and watching people's other television shows, and that you get analytical about structure and how did they do this. And, same thing when I watch movies. I think you learn a lot by other people's storytelling. I think I'd want to expand past a collection of essays, but this works for me. And it's also, as you know, it's an enormous amount of time, even for this very small format book. And when you're self-publishing, it's your assignment, soup to nuts. And I wanted to give everything its just due. I did work with a woman, Carla Green, to help me with the layout and the design of the book, because that is not my skill set at all. And I also felt that I needed a independent editor and proofreader, because as you've been working with a manuscript for months, you could spell your own name wrong and you can't see it anymore. You just can't see the errors. And at the same time, having a degree of separation helps to have somebody else read it, because if the proofreader said, hey, you said this, but why did it end that way instead of this way? And I didn't mind her asking the question because it forced me to justify why I did what I did. And I took a lot of direction from a lot of people just because I felt I'm so very close to the source material that having an objective take on things, and there was a lot of pushback, but it helped me articulate why I did what I did. And I think that's really important for any writer.
Right. I tell this to the authors, your first draft, you're going to rewrite. Your second draft, this is the one you give to an editor. Then you go through anywhere from 2 to 5 more drafts before you get a final product. Then you give it to a book formatter. Now you go back and forth between the layout, how you want it, it depends if you're working with a publisher or self-publish. A publisher will have a format that they use for books. where a formatter for independent is going to make it look pretty for the author.
Right.
That's the
well,
difference.
There's rules of the road. And like, I'll tell you, I had a very humbling first conversation with my editor, and she had been an editor for McCall's and Redbook, and I selected her because my demographic is, basically women 40 to 60 who would have lived this life. And the first thing she said, cute book, but I think it'd be more effective written in the present tense than the past. And I said, oh, well, I thought memoirs were always in the past. She said, it's a stylistic choice. I think this book would be stronger in the present tense. So gulp. First meeting, I got to take it all back and go through the entire manuscript and go from past tense to present tense. But I took my medicine on that because I said, the reason why I hired someone was to give me professional guidance. She feels strongly about this. I am in no place to really contest that. Let's give it a go.
Right. You have to, when you're an author, have a thick skin.
Right.
Your editors, your publishers, book reviewers, they're all going to give you feedback. Not all of it is going to be roses and candy.
And I also think a book has to have a point of view. And I knew it would appeal to everyone. I'm pleasantly surprised that it appeals to as many people as it does. But I mean, I can also tell when a friend has bought it, read it, and is polite with me, but I can tell it didn't ring their chimes, which is fine. Fine. What they will say is, wow, one, I learned a lot about you. Two, is a fun read, but I mean, like, I'm not into fantasy books. Okay. It could be the best fantasy book ever written, structurally, character-wise, everything. It's just not going to appeal to me. And that's okay. I'm pretty open to constructive criticism and suggestion. And I think I would say for any first-time author, the phrase is body of work. This is my first step. And not that I would ever equate myself with the likes of Joan Didion, but like the first book she wrote made no noise. So you learn your lessons from the first effort and you take them and you incorporate it into the next one. And there's going to be more lessons and more lessons and more lessons. But I think that I am proud of how it came out. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's a nice, as I said, a literary equivalent of a stick of gum. It's a fun ride. And I think people will see themselves in it. I think they will see their own children in it. And I think you'll see just the universal nuttiness of human behavior.
That is great. So where can our viewers, our listeners, and our readers find you?
I think the easiest way to get a whole big hit is to go to the website, which is helmet-freechildhood.com, or just put Confessions of a Helmet-Free Childhood in your Google search, and that'll come up. The website's a good place to start because it will give you a sample chapter, it will give you the contents, it will give you 3 reviews from independent reviewers, and then it has hot links both to the Barnes & Noble buy page or Amazon. And if you go through my website, part of the purchase with Amazon Smile goes to my kids' public school in Los Angeles. And boy, public school needs as much help as possible right about now. So I thank you for that in advance. The other thing is it's in all formats. I've done an Audible. It's an ebook, it's hardback, it's paperback, because different people like to absorb reading different ways. So I wanted to make that possible. But I think if you go to the website, you'll have a pretty good sense going through the 4 pages of the website, is this for me, or if it's not, and I'll hope you give it a try.
There we go. I welcome you so much for being on the show today.
This was really fun. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And I'm sure everyone out there is going to love this as soon as they get their hands on it.
Thanks.
Have a wonderful day and happy reading.
All right, take care.